Welcome back to another deep dive. And today, we are looking at a stack of documents that, I have to be honest, at first glance, looks like the absolute driest reading material you could possibly find.
Oh, absolutely. The cure for insomnia, right?
Exactly. We're talking about official parliamentary bulletins, specifically the opposition bulletins from the Parliament of Sri Lanka.
It really does sound like that. But then you start reading, we're just looking at 4 days here, January 20th to the 23rd, 2026, and you realize this isn't just meeting minutes, well, it's got everything.
It really does. It reads
Yeah.
like a disaster movie script mixed with, a political thriller.
Because the backdrop for this week is just immense. You have a massive natural disaster, a cyclone unfolding in real time. You have these accusations of a conspiracy inside the Ministry of Education.
And my favorite part, a huge fight over whether you can run national policy using a PowerPoint presentation.
A PowerPoint, yes.
So we have arguments over slides, we have allegations of corruption involving coal that could make people sick, and this really heart-wrenching debate about Cyclone 𝗙𝗦𝗓.
And that's really the mission for this deep dive, isn't it? We're going to unpack how the opposition is constructing its case against the government. And I want to be really clear from the get-go. Everything we're talking about today is drawn directly from these opposition bulletins.
Right. This is their perspective.
Exactly. It's the world seen through the eyes of the government's fiercest critics. We're analyzing their arguments, their data, their rhetoric, just to understand the narrative they're trying to build.
So if you're ready to see how a political battle is fought on paper, let's dive in. And we have to start with a topic that just casts a shadow over this entire week. Cyclone 𝗙𝗦𝗓.
Yeah, this isn't just a weather event in these documents. It's the lens through which every other failure is viewed. The context is it's heavy.
It is.
And the opposition is not holding back. They aren't just saying the government was slow. They're arguing it failed at a fundamental structural level.
There's this one detail that jumped out at me because it feels so relatable. It's about text messages. You know those emergency alerts we all get on our phones?
The ones that make that horrible loud noise.
That's the one. Well, MP 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗓𝗦𝗪 brought this up, and he pointed out something that's both fascinating and, frankly, terrifying. He said the week before the disaster, the SMS warnings were working perfectly.
Oh, wow.
They were running drills, messages were coming in hour by hour, the system was live.
But
then, according to the opposition, when the actual critical moment arrived, when the storm was hitting and people needed to move,
the system failed.
It failed. The warnings just didn't go out.
That is the ultimate betrayal of technology, isn't it? It works when you test it, and it fails when you actually need it.
And 𝗦𝗓𝗪 uses this failure to make this really biting historical point. He said, and I'm quoting here, "Put aside the story of 76 years and build the 77th year."
That's a powerful rhetorical move.
It is. He's basically saying, stop resting on your laurels. He said, we watched people being washed away in the huge flood that came in the 77th year of independence.
It paints this picture of a nation that's, been independent for nearly 8 decades, but still can't perform the most basic duty of keeping its citizens safe.
And that emotional failure is then compounded by what the opposition frames as a financial betrayal.
Right, and this is where we get into the he said, she said of disaster relief. The numbers here are pretty stark.
So the opposition claims the president initially made a very specific promise. 100,000 rupees for a lost roofing sheet, and 500,000 for a totally destroyed house.
Which, it's not a fortune, but it's a lifeline if you've lost everything.
Exactly. But the accusation in these bulletins is that those amounts have been slashed.
Slashed by how much?
They claim the actual payout instructions have knocked it down to less than 50,000 rupees.
From 500,000 to less than 50.
Yeah. MP 𝗦𝗪𝗦𝗪𝗦𝗧 𝗦𝗓𝗧 even said there are people who haven't received even smaller amounts, like 25,000.
And to put that into perspective for everyone listening, the UN estimates 1.5 million people were affected. The economic loss is pegged at around $4 billion.
$4 billion.
So slashing aid from 500K to 50K. That's the difference between actually rebuilding a home and just, putting up a tarp.
And in the middle of all this loss, there's this vicious political fight over how to even investigate what went wrong. The government set up a select committee, which sounds pretty standard.
Standard, yes.
Yeah.
But the opposition was having none of it. This is where MP 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗧𝗧𝗧 dropped this amazing analogy. He compared it to asking the fox to guard the hen house.
I love that. It's so vivid.
It cuts right to the trust issue, The argument is, how can the government possibly investigate its own failure impartially?
So what do they want instead? If not a select committee, then what?
They want a complete overhaul. The opposition leader is demanding a brand new Disaster Management Act to replace the one from 2005.
So a whole new legal framework.
A new framework, a dedicated cabinet ministry just for disaster management, and an immediate international donor conference.
So they're arguing the current system is just reactive.
Exactly. That's the key point.
Yeah.
Their argument is the government is stuck in crisis management mode.
Running around with buckets after the roof is already leaking.
Right. Instead of having a proactive legal and financial structure in place before the storm even hits.
It's a classic case of saying the entire system is broken, not just the response. But speaking of broken systems, let's pivot to the other massive controversy in these bulletins, education. And I have to say, this story is bizarre.
It really is. This is the whole education reform program debate.
Yeah.
And if I had to give this section a headline, it would be Policy via PowerPoint.
Okay, let's unpack this because it sounds like a corporate satire. The government's trying to push through a huge overhaul of the education system, but the opposition's main complaint seems to be procedural. They keep asking, where's the paper?
Precisely. To get why they're so angry, you have to understand the Westminster tradition, which Sri Lanka follows.
Yeah.
Normally, you start with a green paper. There's a discussion document, you get feedback. Then you publish a white paper, which is the formal policy.
It's a way of showing your work, building consensus.
Right. But the opposition leader stood up and said this massive reform, changing how every child in the nation is taught, was presented as a PowerPoint presentation.
A slideshow.
A slideshow. And they're arguing you cannot fundamentally change a nation's education based on a slide deck. They call it the vulgarization of education.
That is a scathing critique. It suggests complex policy work was just replaced with bullet points.
But it gets deeper than just the format, right? There are these allegations of a conspiracy in the content itself.
Yeah, this part was wild. The back and forth about a link.
A web link.
A web link.
In a syllabus.
Yes. So Deputy Minister 𝗦𝗦𝗕𝗏 𝗦𝗦𝗍𝒂 apparently claimed there was a questionable link in the 2015 technology syllabus. The implication being the previous administration put something inappropriate in there. Okay.
But then MP Rohini Kaviratne fires back. She says, no, that's false. She claims the link was deliberately inserted or referenced incorrectly now to discredit the previous work.
So it's a who planted the link mystery.
It sounds like a total mess of accusations.
Yeah.
But beyond the conspiracy stuff, there are hard operational failures being cited. The opposition claims new learning modules were printed at a cost of hundreds of millions of rupees.
And were they any good?
Apparently not. They were full of errors, quality deficiencies, a rush job.
And the kicker to this whole story, the reforms didn't even happen.
Right, postponed by the president himself until 2027.
Which led to that amazing moment of irony in Parliament. MP Mujibur Rahman stands up and just asks, is the president also in the opposition?
It's a fair question in that context. The president basically stopped his own government's reform program, citing the very issues, technical problems, teacher training, that the opposition had been screaming about all week.
Which, in their eyes, completely validates their critique. They're not saying don't reform, they're saying don't rush.
And they keep pointing to what they call the 5 pillars of reform.
Right. This is a really important concept in their argument.
They list 5 things: curriculum, human resources, infrastructure, assessment, and awareness. Their whole point is that the government tried to rush the curriculum, the books, without doing the other 4.
So you change the book, but you don't train the teacher, which is human resources, or fix the classroom infrastructure.
Exactly. You can't run new software on a computer you haven't built yet. And MP 𝗦𝗦𝗕𝗏, who is the chairman of the Sectoral Oversight Committee on Education, said the reforms never even came to his committee for review.
Wow, that's a huge procedural red flag. It just reinforces that narrative we saw with the cyclone, a complete lack of consultation.
And when you skip those checks and balances, the next accusation is almost inevitable, isn't it?
Corruption.
Corruption.
Which brings us perfectly to the energy sector, because nothing says controversy quite like a coal tender.
This is about the 𝗦𝗏𝗕𝗏 coal power plant. The opposition leader and MP 𝗦𝗏𝗏 𝗦𝗏𝗕𝗏 are raising very serious flags here. They call the tender extremely corrupt.
Now, corruption often just means money, but here, the stakes feel a lot higher. We're talking about public health.
Right. MP 𝗦𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 explicitly mentioned the risk of respiratory hazards and kidney disease for the people living near the plant. The core allegation is that they're bringing in poor quality, dirty coal.
So cheaper, nastier stuff that burns dirtier.
That's the claim. But look at the financial allegation, too. They're asking if tender conditions were relaxed for a supplier with, get this,
Wow.
no prior experience in power plant supplies.
Wait, no experience
Yeah.
for a national power plant.
That is the allegation.
That's like hiring a plumber to fly a plane.
It is. And the opposition claims this combination, bad coal, mismanagement, has already cost the country over 10 billion rupees.
It connects back to that theme of bad governance costing the public money and health.
And speaking of public money, we have to touch on 𝗦𝗨𝗕𝗦𝗧𝗦𝗧.
The welfare benefit scheme.
Right. Now, normally, a government would brag about expanding welfare. Look, we're helping more people.
But the opposition completely flipped this argument on its head.
They did. It was a brilliant piece of political judo. The government put out a stat saying 80% of the country now needs relief. They framed it as a success. Look at our coverage.
Okay.
But the opposition leader said, hold on a second. If 80% of your people need welfare, that isn't a success story for your welfare program. That is an obituary for your economy.
An obituary for your economy. That is a devastating line.
It is. He argues that relief isn't poverty eradication. Eradication comes from production, exports, jobs. So people don't need welfare in the first place.
You've just turned the country into a charity ward, is the argument.
Precisely. It reframes the whole thing from generosity to failure.
Now, in the middle of all these heavy topics, there were two little nuggets in the bulletins that I found absolutely fascinating. Blinking, you'll miss it moments, but they say so much.
Okay.
The first one is about traitors.
Yes. The Colonial Gazette. This is pure history coming alive.
So there's a push to revoke a British colonial gazette from somewhere between 1796 and 1948. This old document named certain Muslim leaders from 𝗙𝗦𝗕𝗏𝗦 and 𝗙𝗢𝗪 as traitors to the British crown.
Presumably for resisting colonial rule.
Exactly. And the proposal now is to officially flip that and declare them national heroes.
It's symbolic, but symbols matter. It's about correcting the historical record.
But the second nugget is much more tangible. It's not about paper, it's about gold.
The gold jewelry.
Yes. MP 𝗦𝗦𝗕𝗏𝗦𝗖𝗥𝗓𝗓𝗦 raised a question about gold jewelry taken from people in the North during the Civil War.
That is a very, very sensitive issue.
He wants to know the quantity in kilograms and when it's going to be returned.
It's just a reminder, isn't it, that while Parliament is debating digital reforms, there are still these deep, unresolved wounds from the past. People are still waiting for their family heirlooms back.
It really shows the sheer breadth of what gets discussed. Colonial past, Civil War past, digital future. But let's move to the final big battle of the week. January 23rd, the Universities Amendment Bill.
If the education reform was policy by PowerPoint, this one is control by appointment.
So what's the core issue?
It's all about power. The opposition claims the new amendment allows the governing council and the vice-chancellor to appoint deans and heads of departments directly.
And how is it done now?
Right now, in most cases, it's a democratic internal election. The professors vote for who they want to lead their faculty.
So instead of a vote, the top boss just picks someone.
Exactly. And the opposition argues this politicizes the entire university. If the vice-chancellor is a political appointee and they appoint the deans, the whole thing becomes a political hierarchy.
And why should the average person care how a dean is picked?
The opposition connects it directly to the brain drain.
A huge issue in Sri Lanka right now.
A huge issue. They argue that if you take away academic freedom, if professors are afraid their boss is a political hack who will fire them for disagreeing, the best minds will just leave.
They'll go to universities abroad where they actually have autonomy.
Right. And the international rankings will plummet. The whole system could collapse. And again, they point out that the Sectoral Oversight Committee met with professors who demanded changes.
So the academics themselves felt totally excluded from the process.
There's the pattern again.
Yeah.
We wrote the law without asking the people who actually do the job.
So let's zoom out. A cyclone recovery called a deception. An education reform that was just a slideshow. A coal tender accused of corruption. A university bill accused of authoritarianism.
And when you synthesize all of that, a really clear theme emerges. The opposition isn't just attacking the results. They aren't just mad about the floods or the bad books. They are attacking the process.
It's process versus product.
Exactly. In every single one of these cases, the grievance is that the government skipped a step.
Right. No white paper for education.
No consulting the professors for the university bill.
No proper tender process for the coal.
Not even an updated Disaster Management Act from 2005.
It's interesting because the opposition keeps saying, we support reform. They want education reform, but they oppose the method.
And that leads us to the bigger question, doesn't it? The opposition is painting this picture of a government trying to bypass all the checks and balances. Mm. Now, the government might argue they're just trying to be agile in a crisis. We don't have time for a white paper. The kids need books.
We don't have time for a tender. We need power now.
Right. But the opposition's argument, based on this week's events, is that the red tape, the white papers, the committee hearings, is actually the safety reel.
And skipping it is why the flood warnings failed and the new books were full of errors.
Does strict adherence to procedure save lives, or does it just delay action? That's the tension.
And it leaves you with a really provocative thought. In a time of constant crisis, there's a huge temptation to say, just get it done, forget the paperwork. But the argument presented this week is that the paperwork is the only thing standing between the public and total corruption or incompetence.
It's the difference between getting it done and getting it done right. And this week, the price for getting it wrong was incredibly high.
A lot to mull over there. It's about so much more than just politics.
Absolutely. And if you're curious about what the opposition thinks should have happened with schools, check out the show notes. We've broken down those 5 pillars of reform they kept mentioning. It's worth a look to see the alternative vision.
That brings us to the end of this deep dive. It was a chaotic week on paper, and I imagine even more so in the chamber. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.
Stay curious.